Hello and welcome to another episode of Chats with Chip. I'm your host, Chip Griffin, the founder of Saga, the Small Agency Growth Alliance, and I'm delighted to have back with me today a very regular contributor to really all of the different platforms and podcasts and videos that I've done over the years, Jody Sutter of the Sutter Company. Welcome, Jody.
Thank you, Chip. It's always nice to be back.
It is great to have you. I always know we're going to have a great conversation. I often don't know where we're going to head with it. We just kind of start and see where it takes us, but I think that makes it interesting for us and hopefully interesting and useful for the listeners.
For any listener, and I will have a good time.
Yes, absolutely. But for any listeners who, for whatever reason, may have been under a rock and have never heard you on any of these platforms, why don't you just give a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I am the owner of the Sutter Company. It's a new business consulting and coaching company. Like you, I also focus on working with small agencies, specifically the owners of small agencies, those agencies that are usually between, say, 5 and 35 people who, for whom business development is essential, but don't have the ability to support productively a salesperson or a business development rep, and really they need a system that is going to allow them to use their own internal personal strengths to do business development on their terms and feel control of the revenue that they can potentially generate for their agency. So that's what I've been doing. As I said, for about 10 years, I'm a career business development professional. Before I worked for myself, I worked for other agencies, large and small, running business development. And so that's really where I focus. And like I said, I believe that I think any agency owner deserves to feel like they are in control of where their revenue is coming from. And I help them achieve that.
Yeah, and look, owners want to feel in control of their revenue and probably a lot of other things, but the revenue is something that they can focus on a bit more. Obviously, given your laser-like focus on business development, I think it makes sense to start there. We are at the start of a new year, which means that a lot of owners have closed the books on the previous year. They've looked at them. They've started making projections and wish lists for this year as far as what they would like to be making and how much they would like to bring in for new business. They had some time over the holidays, and so maybe they've started cooking up some schemes in their heads for how they're going to find those prospects. So as we head here into the start of 2025, let's take a moment and just talk about where we see agency business development today. I think it's fair to say the last couple of years have been tough for a lot of small agencies. Not all. I mean, there's like anything else, there are exceptions to the rule, but by and large, they haven't been gangbuster years for most small agencies. There's still a lot of uncertainty in the air, economically, politically, socially, et cetera. So as you're taking a look at this, as you're talking with a lot of agency owners and focused on their business development activities, how are things looking for this year?
Wow. Well, I wish I had an awesome crystal ball to give you a direct, clear, and more accurate than not answer. But I don't know. And I think, again, it's still a new year. We are at the time of recording this. We are about to go into a new administration here in the United States. And I think a lot of people are probably waiting to see what happens with that. AI has really been changing things. And I think this is going to be the year where AI really starts to become normalized. So it's funny. I always get a little bit nervous when I ask these questions too, because I think, I should have my finger on the pulse of these trends. The bottom line, I think business development is one of those things that the tools may change, and yet the underlying philosophy or the underlying skill set rarely changes. And so I will say what I've always said is the first thing I ask my clients to do is to be willing to look at who they serve best and the problems that they solve. And I think that can, if you're willing to be clear about that, that does a lot for just sort of cutting through the clutter and the noise. And then you can start using your AI tools or your Apollo.io lists, building those lists, using technology to help to amplify that message. So the amplification may be different. I think the idea behind the message is still the same, though. I don't know if that maybe is a disappointing answer.
No,
but that's what I go back to, the basics.
I want to key off of a couple of things that you said there, but I think one of the key things in my mind, at least, is this notion of figuring out, who you are. Who are you serving? What do you do? What are the results? Because I'm sure you see this, a lot of small agencies have not done a particularly good job at positioning and defining their ideal client. And it's a lot of just kind of, fire everything at the wall and see what happens. And so I think that, with the start of a new year, it's always a good time to sit down and reflect and say, are we as clear as we can be? And so when you're working with an agency owner and trying to help them through this process, what steps do you encourage them to do in order to refine that positioning and define their ideal client, particularly if they're one of the many small agency owners who say, well, we can really do this for anybody. We just, we know what we're doing and we don't want to eliminate opportunities. So I really don't want to get that granular.
Yeah. I think the first argument I would make, if you were an agency owner telling me that, the first argument I would make would be to think a little critically about the time that you have and your team has to run a successful business development operation. And if you're saying to me that you don't want to limit yourself, you don't want to limit the opportunities, then you will have to work exponentially harder to reach that many more people, companies, businesses. Because and I guess there's two things. First, there's the scale, the quantity. If you're serving everyone, like that tired phrase, if you're serving everyone, you're serving no one. But yeah, so there's literally everyone. How does a small agency, what kind of advertising budget or marketing budget do you need to reach everyone? Also, I find that the language that you've got to use in the marketplace is very unsticky. So the first thing that I tend to do in my process, and a lot of times I think people are a little bit surprised. I think often the first thing that agencies tend to do, or any business tends to do, and they start thinking about what are we saying about ourselves, how are we positioning, is that they look inward and they ask those things. What are we saying about ourselves? Is this clear? What do we want to be? Those are really important questions. I think it's much more useful, though, to start out by asking ourselves, who are we serving? What are the problems that we solve? What I've found often when I work with clients is that while the answer to the question of who are we, what do we do, how do we want to be perceived, while that can be a very frustrating exercise, often when I can turn the mirror onto the reflection of the clients, of the clients that they serve, it becomes so much clearer. It's so much easier because there's objectivity, and we tend to have a much more productive conversation around if it's a financial services category, around regulatory issues, or if it's a consumer product category, maybe it's reaching Gen Z, or whatever the issue is that they know their clients have. And when we can start focusing on that and define the problems, then the solutions and how we communicate those solutions becomes a lot easier. It's not foolproof. I often find that agencies still sometimes fall back on this idea of like, we want to serve everyone. But I have seen it work really successfully, and a lot of sort of, light bulbs at the top of the head that go off.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is so much easier to sell what you're doing if you're clear about what it is that you do and who you do it for, because your prospects hear themselves in that. And ultimately, I think that the whole notion of being a full service agency that can do this for, everybody and their brother just doesn't make sense, because most small agencies, most mid-sized agencies only have 10, 15, 20 clients tops at any given time. And so you don't need that many. There's no need to go out there and get thousands of prospects. It's a waste of time and energy on your part, and makes it so much more difficult to get the right fit client.
Yeah, that's something else I'll often ask when they talk about growing, or when agencies talk about, building that list of hundreds of prospects. I will often try to reorient the conversation by asking, well, how many, in order to reach your growth goals for the year, how many clients do you need? And often the answer is between, say, 1 and 3. And so then why do you need a 2,500 person or 2,500 business list of businesses? Let's get a little more focused.
It doesn't make any sense, and it's really costly and time consuming to try to do that. Not to mention just difficult on the brain power to try to focus in that way. So I do think having that focus as a starting point is good. But okay, so now let's assume that we've got an agency that has figured that out, and so they're like, okay, well, we've refined our positioning for 2025. We're going to charge ahead. I mean, for an agency that's used to just sitting around waiting for the phone to ring or the email to come in, which we know is a lot of agencies out there. What are the first incremental steps that they should be thinking about to get this year off to a good start?
Right. So you've got the positioning, which allows you to send out a strong email or a message or have a productive initial conversation with a stranger. But that's still pretty close in. How do you amplify that? So the next thing I think that I advise people to do is to then think about, okay, now that we've had some kind of positioning, now we've sort of taken everything that we could do, we've concentrated it into this thing that is going to be the most promising for us. Now I ask my clients to go back out and let's amplify that into a series of organized messaging themes. So you have to sort of think again about how does this message start to manifest itself? What are the variations that we can use in the marketplace so that we can have a sustained conversation? Because as we know, the buying cycle is really long for agency services. Rarely is it a matter of weeks, more often a matter of months. And I'm sure you had conversations where people have talked about, 2-3 years that a prospect finally converted. The other thing I think that where agencies can fall short, and I try to help get them back on the right path, is understanding how to use their own strengths. I've often find that business development is an obstacle or a burden when the agency owner, who's typically, in my situation, probably yours too, they're the ones who typically have to drive it. It's when the agency owner feels like what they need to do is so foreign to their own capabilities and strengths. And so I take a step back and say, well, what are those strengths? And we've probably talked about this before, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but it would be the kind of thing if you are if you're an introvert and the last thing that you want to do is get out onto a keynote stage to promote your agency, then maybe let's think about things that are a little better for introverts. I mean, it's a bit of a it's a long-term tactic, but if you're an introvert and you've got some big ideas, maybe we should think about getting you writing a book and then putting as an engine behind that so that the book gets out there and generates leads. And how do we support that? If you're a speaker, maybe you're really strong on the big ideas, big concepts. You love being in front of groups of people. You're probably terrible at details, which is what I've found. Not universally true. So then let's get you out on the keynote stages and maybe have someone else support you on those details. And then there are other agency owners that are actually really good on the outreach, who don't mind walking into a room full of strangers or don't mind sending emails to people they don't know. But they may not be the best people to write a really insightful article or blog post. So it's kind of simple. Let's get them not doing the things that they don't feel like they're good at. And let's get them doing the things that they do feel like they're good at. I also like working in 12-week sprints. So rather than thinking about business development as this big monumental goal, let's break it down into steps that we can take today, this week, this quarter. And I find that also it starts to generate and build new habits, as well as feel like you are seeing some progress.
Yeah, I love that you are talking about leaning into what you're already comfortable doing, what you feel like you're good at, as opposed to saying, well, here's the simple magic formula that you need to grow your agency, which there's a lot of that out there. Where
you
just
have
follow
to call
my 7
100 people
steps.
a week.
Yeah.
I do too. I do actually have 9 steps, but so there are steps to follow. But yes, it's got to work for you.
Yeah. Because if you hate doing it, you're not going to do it. Yeah. So you're better off picking 1 or 2 things that you're good at, you enjoy doing, and you will do regularly, because that's going to work far better than something that in theory might work better, but in practice won't, because you just don't do it.
That's right. Yeah. And usually those agency leaders, everyone intellectually understands why and how contacting 100 people a week. Sorry if that was like a little reminder. I thought I had do not disturb on, but maybe that, I don't know. Sorry about that, people. Everyone intellectually gets that if you're out there contacting, making 100 connections on LinkedIn a week, that's probably going to lead to business development, to a new business win in the end. But if you hate doing that, then you can intellectually understand it till the cows come home. You're not going to do it, so it's pretty useless.
Yeah, I'd like to drill down on the 12-week sprint concept, because I think that is particularly helpful to folks who they sit there and they say, well, I'm trying to grow revenue 25% over the next, year or so. And that's a big daunting challenge. And so breaking it down into component parts that you can accomplish in shorter periods of time. I mean, I've overseen development teams, and it works really well for them to have these short sprints where you can accomplish specific things as opposed to building a whole app. And that may take, a year or two or more. And so breaking it down into those kinds of sprints. And I think the other thing that you referenced was, basically focusing on the things that you can control within that, right? We can't control whether we actually sign the new business. So is that a good goal in the end? Sure. But you need to have the incremental ones, which are the inputs, the steps that we're taking. So how do you think about these 12-week sprints? Do you sit down every 12 weeks and create a new one? Do you sit down and map out the next 4 sprints? How do you work with clients on these sprints?
The way that we typically do it is we do, I prefer the 12 weeks over the 12 months. However, we start with, we start with the positioning. Who are we serving, and what are we saying about ourselves that is going to be like a magnet to that audience? Then we also look at what are our resources that we can use. Like, do we have good writers? Do we have good speakers? Do we have good organizers? Do we have great developers? Because that also is going to dictate what you can do. So again, don't want to do something that you don't have the resources to do or aren't willing to hire for. The 12-week, then after we have that, we then look at like, okay, what are our priorities for the year? We want to double revenue, which is for most agencies probably unrealistic, but great. We want to double revenue.
But a very popular goal. Very popular goal. Just pulled out of the air. I want to double.
Yeah.
In 12 months. That's great.
So, all right. Well, let's start. We got to start January 6th-ish this year in 2025. So what do we do on day one? And that really helps agencies go, oh, wow, holy cow. Okay, I got to figure this out. So for instance, I'm working with an agency right now, and they're a slightly larger agency than a lot of agencies I work with. They're about 30 people. And so we've got 3 different teams working on 3 different sprints. Only one of them is around outreach and building lists. And by the way, it's probably the one that I'm seeing the least progress on. But the other 2, one is on redeveloping their case studies and launching them back on the website, because it's hard to sell an agency's work without strong case studies, without a good story behind it. And the other one is on is a sprint around updating and improving their proposal template. So those are the things that I think an agency has to realize, like, well, how are we going to double our revenue if we don't have those case studies to show? If we keep going out there with inferior tools or tools that just aren't as productive as they could be, we got to figure that stuff out first. And so that can be frustrating, because then you go back to like, well, but we need leads today. So I try to manage that a little bit and say, okay, well, let's take this as a step-by-step process. And when you have something specific, like, well, we need 12 case studies rewritten in 12 weeks. Great. What are we doing week 1? Okay, well, week 1, maybe we need to figure out we need to identify those case studies. We need to hire a writer. And then by the end of week 2, we will have critical feedback on each case. I'm making it up. But if you break it down into these smaller steps, now you know what you're doing for the week. And it's also easier to check the box when you ask yourself, did I get it done? And I think this gets beyond the business development thing, but I think it's really motivating. I know it's motivating for me, and it's been motivating for other people. If you can look back and say, I set out to do 3 things this week to further this sprint, and what do you know, I've done them, and now I feel like I've got the wind in my back going into the next week.
Yeah, because with long sales cycles, it may take a while before you see the actual outcomes that you're looking for. So being able to see that incremental progress, makes it so much easier to stick with it, because I'm sure you see this as well. I work with lots of folks who they bounce from business development tactic to business development tactic every 12 weeks, probably every 12 days, because, they start something and it doesn't immediately, bear fruit. And so they're like, well, on to the next thing. Or worse, what I see sometimes is they have a tactic that does well, and they're like, okay, well, what's the next thing that we do that's going to do well?
That's right.
Lean into what's already working.
That's right. I will often map out in a very broad way a sort of 1 to 3 year plan. So if we decided, one of the ways I've done that is that if I'm working with an agency, we've decided that the agency leader or the agency owner is a really good communicator. They're really good at taking complex ideas and turning them into concepts that are easy to understand. They're great in front of a crowd. They love going to talk. Fantastic. Let's first, year one, let's get that person out there. Let's get some minimum amount of support to start to build the list of events, to start to get a couple of keynote speeches written, and to start pitching. As you see success, year two, you can start adding things like maybe you bring in a strategist or a writer that can help to ghostwrite some of the agency leaders' content, or you bring in a marketing coordinator to do some of that detailed, logistical organization. Maybe by year three, you're bringing in a PR person, a publicity person, because now they're developing a better profile. So let's amplify that with that other expert. So again, rather than saying, what we've got this going, how do we make a right turn or a left turn and do something totally different? It's more about how do we make this even better.
Yep. So a lot of what we've been talking about so far have been sort of, long-term, laying the foundation, building a system that will work over time. When you have an agency owner who comes to you and says, look, 2024 was kind of rough for me. I've got a big client. They're kind of teetering. I'm a little worried.
Yeah.
I need to do something faster. What advice do you have for folks like that who are in a little bit more of a desperation mode, if you will, for new business?
And again, I'm about to, the suggestion I'm about to make is so not new and innovative. But I think the first thing you need to do, if you are in that mode of if some drastic measures need to be taken and taken quickly, I think the first thing you have to do is, again, double-barreled. One, rely on your network. And I think a lot of times agencies will say, we've exhausted our network. I have heard that a lot, but I rarely see it as being true. So the other thing and the way to kind of revive that network is if you can go back to what we were talking about earlier, which is, okay, where do we want to focus this year? And sometimes also that does require, so if that's an agency that's a generalist agency, and so they can work with everyone, which means how are they going to find that one person who can hire them? And they're about to lose that client, so maybe 50% of their billings is about to walk out the door. What you probably want to do is say, okay, well, even for a short term, even for this one initiative, let's narrow down to a thing or a set of services or a problem that we know is an issue. And maybe it's only for the next 12 months that we're really focused on that. I like long-term stuff, but again, if you need to get out there, so getting out there with a pointed message to the people who know and like you best to say, and I think also sometimes honesty can work too. Like, here's the deal. We're not like, you want to be careful with your words, but to say we are, in so many words, we have big ambitions. We're up against some headwinds. You've known us for a long time. We ask for your help. Here's where we want to go. We want to serve these people of these problems. Do you have any suggestions? Is there anyone to refer us to? And I think when you can when you can combine the request for a referral with that really pointed, but here's what we want to do. Here's the impact that we want to make. Then you're supercharging that referral. That person receiving it is going to be much more likely and interested and willing to go to their network, rather than the sort of the desperate, please send us anyone. Do you know anyone? We'll work with anyone.
Refer me anyone. It's one of the reasons why having strong focused positioning is so useful, because it's so much easier to get referrals. Because if I say to you, hey, Jody, I'm looking for PR agencies between 3 and 30 people who are looking to grow, single owner, that kind of thing, you can immediately start going through your mental Rolodex and think of some people that you might refer. If I say, hey, I just want to help people with their businesses.
Yeah.
Boom. Yeah. That's really hard to come up with.
And by the way, we're really, really great. We've got a great team. We're easy to work with. And
our team is our differentiator.
Yes.
Okay. You go for it. We treat our clients like partners.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Never heard that one before. So, if you want to differentiate, you have to differentiate in a useful way. But I think having that positioning and I think your other point, people have not exhausted their networks, because I hear that all the time too. And the reality is they'll sit there and tell me, well, but these people already know what I do. The answer is maybe, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
They may not know it as specifically as you think they do.
Yes.
And you may not be top of mind. So you need to make sure that even people who are your best buddies, you still need to be in touch with them on a regular basis. Because you may not, I mean, I've had plenty of occasions over the course of my career where even really good friends and colleagues end up referring someone else for something that I could have done, not because they thought that was a better person, but because I wasn't top of mind because we hadn't talked in 6 months or 9 months or a year. And so you need to, my advice anytime someone's desperate is just start going through your own Rolodex. And I'm showing my age by saying Rolodex repeatedly here, but go through your LinkedIn profile, go through your contact list in email, and find a reason to touch base with all of these folks. And you don't have to come across as desperate. Look, if you say you're looking for referrals, people know there's at least a small level of desperation. It may be desperation to grow. It may be desperation to fill a gap. But you don't ask for business if you're too busy to take on business.
Right. And, I will qualify a little bit because I think agencies do feel very comfortable showing a certain amount of vulnerability. But, and so I don't think either of us are saying, go out there and saying, we really need the help. But I remember having a conversation a long time ago with an agency search consultant. And one of the things he said was so useful is when agencies let him know that they were about to lose a client, which meant, especially for larger agencies, when I worked with larger agencies, if, and this is in one particular case, we lost a big cruise company. And we were able to fill that. So that opened a space on our roster, which meant another cruise lines could come in without feeling like they were competing with us, or even another hotel chain. So by going out to the marketplace and saying, this cruise line is hiring someone else, we have this knowledge, we've got a team, we could jump right in. You should take advantage of it. Or do you have clients who can take advantage of this? If you can change your mindset to feel confident about the experience that you have and what you have to offer, you've got a great reason for going out to the marketplace to let them know that you can take on new business.
Yeah, and as you say, it's all about how you frame it. And in that particular case, where you're able to frame that we no longer have a client conflict issue, but we have all of this knowledge and experience that we'd like to put to work for the right new client. And that is dealing from a position of strength as opposed to, I don't know if we're going to make payroll next month, so anybody want to just throw me some cash for pretty much anything?
Now, by the way, again, this is like this is really scraping the bottom of the barrel of tactics. But if you're in truly, truly desperate straits, then probably what I would do is to go to that sort of that top 5% of, buddies, people you do anything for. And maybe those are the people that you can be vulnerable with. And say, look, here's the deal. I need a favor. And so I think you also have to be willing to do that, but you have to be very careful about that too, of course.
Yeah, I mean, we all have people in our networks like that, or most of us do at least, that you can be that vulnerable. I think it is just being choosy about it. I mean, I occasionally see people post like to LinkedIn, I'm so desperate kind of things. I don't necessarily think that a broadcast message like that is productive because it can alienate some potential prospects who might still have been viable. If you hadn't scared them off that way. So it's a balancing act. But, I think that, the key thing is if you are in one of the best case scenarios, lay the foundation for the future, build systems and processes that are repeatable, that can help you succeed over time. But if you have to do something quickly, then tap into your existing network first and foremost, because it's a whole lot easier to deal with people who already know at least a little bit about you as opposed to making new connections, because those are always going to take much longer to bear fruit.
Yeah. It's I think also the quick wins. It's really tough because, as we were saying, business development in our category in the agency business it's a longer cycle, and this is sort of also going into the agency operations, which is not necessarily my core area of expertise. But if you are looking for a long-term successful new business strategy, it potentially means going through some months of discomfort in order to reap the benefit of that focused strategy. And again, easy for me to say because I don't have to worry about helping you, the Mrs. Agency owner, with managing your account management team. Right. But so I want to acknowledge that, there are many, many other things that have to come into play there. But sometimes the the fear of going through some short-term discomfort for long-term gain is can be just too hard for agency owners to deal with. And sometimes I wish that they were more willing to think about that.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because I think all too often agencies do look at new business in isolation. And so they come up with plans for growing the business from a revenue standpoint, but they don't think about what it means operationally. And so I often will sit with clients and they'll say, okay, well, I want to add, 50% revenue this year. And so the first thing I do is say, okay, we'll map out when that revenue comes in, because most of the time when they say that, they're like, oh, that's just 3 more clients. But that's assuming they all start on January 1, which of course we know doesn't happen.
Yes.
And so I say, okay, we'll map out, when these new clients are going to come in so we can see what the revenue impact is. And then after we do that, I say, okay, well, now talk to your operations teams and make sure that they can handle the onboarding of this.
Yes.
Because I often see cases where someone is very good at business development. I've seen agencies that really do keep signing people up on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But they also churn very quickly because they're not onboarded well. They're not getting a good experience because the team is being asked to produce too much too fast. And so you really do need to make sure that there is a nice synergy between the business development and the operations side of the equation.
That's right. Yeah, I don't know if I've got a sort of a magic ratio, but I think I think it's pretty common knowledge that the more you can retain and grow existing clients, it's much easier to do that than go out and looking for new clients. And of course, you want that balance. You want an influx of new clients, keeping that pool rich, but you also don't want to neglect the fact that you've got people who have already put their trust in you. You try to deepen that trust and hopefully generate more revenue and more value for them.
Yep, absolutely. So if someone is interested in learning more about how they can build these effective systems and processes and work on sprints and those kinds of things, how can they learn more about you and how they might be able to work with you?
Sure. I would welcome anyone to email me at Jody, and that's Jody with a Y, at thesuttercompany.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Jody Sutter. I think whatever the URL is, linkedin.com/Jody Sutter. I got to snag an easy URL. And I also want to let people know that right now I am in the process of evolving and launching a new program called the Agency New Business Accelerator. And I am in the process of looking for 5 pilot clients. I am offering them 50% off what will be, I think, the normal cost. So they get a great big discount if they're willing to learn and experiment with me. And so just email me and I'm happy to tell you more about that. And once I cap it at 5, that's, that'll be it. And hopefully we'll learn with the first cohort and then move on to the next round.
Excellent. We'll include appropriate links and all of that in the show notes so that if you're listening to this in your car or on the treadmill or something, you don't need to stop and write it down. You can just click on the show notes and get access to all of that information there. So, Jody, as always, it has been a pleasure having you on the show. I'm looking forward already to the next time we'll get to have a conversation about something business development related, or maybe just agency, or maybe just for the fun of it. I mean, you just never know. So,
exactly. I know.
Again, my guest today has been Jody Sutter of the Sutter Company. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Chip.